What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Armchair Fantasy Football live stream. Been a little bit, but we are back and ready to go over the AFC West. Again, this is Armchair Fantasy Football, where we help you out-research your opponent, technically in the offseason, but that's really going to be the case in about a week once the Super Bowl hype and everything is down. Quick, make sure you go in the description. We've got two important links, one for merchandise if you want to swag up, and one for our free Discord. I actually put the right link in there this time. It recycles every 7 days, I learned. But we're just randomly talking about mostly Dynasty stuff right now. When the season really starts to kick off in a few months and the draft is done and we know who's going to be on what roster, we get down to 53 mans, all that good stuff. We'll have live chats there as well. We'll be talking about different trades if you want to throw proposals in there. Occasionally, I'll just do a research blurb and throw that in there as well. So if you are into fantasy 24/7, 366 this year, because we've got a leap year, make sure you go into there. Today, like I said before, we are grading the AFC West. All four teams get grades on our report card at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defensive positions. First off, let me reintroduce our semi-frequent guest, Dylan Shabilsky. He's kind of grinding today. He's broadcasting a college basketball game later, but he hopped on this stream. Dylan, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, it's fun to be back. And like you said, it's a busy day for me, so do what you gotta have.
Right, you got a lot going on. I do appreciate you taking what's probably going to be about an hour out of your day just to go over here. Folks, as always, any questions, comments, concerns, contribute in the live chat below, and we will gladly go into those. All right, we begin with what could end up being the Super Bowl champions for, what is this going to be, 3 times in 6 years. Maybe they'll come up short against a really stacked 49ers team. Not really sure. The Kansas City Chiefs. This is a fun team. Definitely not as talent-filled as we've seen in the past, but one thing that has not changed, the quarterback position, and Dylan and I are in agreement of this. Patty Mahomes is heading to his 4th Super Bowl in the last 6 years. He has done way more with way less this year. I don't want to dive too much into that, but he hasn't had nearly as many weapons as he's had in the past. He's on track to be the best quarterback and, in my opinion, best player in NFL history if he keeps this track record up. Still a long way to go. He's well south of 30. I've got A+, Bill, and you agree.
Yeah, I got an A+ as well. Mahomes is the clear guy in Kansas City. He's got that locked up for a while. No issues, barring his contract. He signed that massive extension. And there's no reason to move on from Mahomes, but he needs some weapons.
Yeah, it is tough because we look at guys in the past, like even Tyreek Hill was there. Juju Smith-Schuster was an impromptu wide receiver one. He filled in here and there. He didn't even register 1,000 yards either. So this year it's been, we won't spoil too much of it. We'll get to the wide receivers in a moment. But something that I think is kind of a shocker, I was high on this guy coming into this year. Definitely going to be a lot higher going into next year. We're talking about Isaiah Pacheco and really the running back room in general. He took over for CEH. He's having a very promising sophomore campaign, 4.6 yards per carry, 935 rushing yards, 44 receptions this year as well. Not much depth behind him. There's CEH. McKinnon is inefficient on the ground, but he's occasionally going to catch a touchdown here and there. He went on some crazy run a little over a year ago today. But I've got him at a B. Dylan, you're a little more optimistic than I.
Yeah, I got a B+. Because Pacheco looked very well. Barring a few weeks out with injury, he can catch and run well. And like you said, the depth is a concern. But honestly, CEH and McKinnon are fine options if Pacheco is out, but it won't equal the numbers that Pacheco produces.
And that's a good point, right? I talk about McKinnon, who really is the second/third option, being not the most efficient in the world. Doesn't really have to be. He's the backup guy. We do have a day and age now where running back by committee is a pretty familiar concept around the league, but nonetheless, bright future in the backfield. There are some things to figure out, and I think the future can only get better for the wide receiver position. D+ on my end, D- from Dylan, almost the worst grade you can get. Rashee Rice, been a great surprise. That is about all I have to say in terms of positive comments about this team. There's no consistent number 2 option. Justin Watson's had a couple nice stretches. Marquez Valdes-Scantling really should be the wide receiver 2 with the amount of big plays he could have had if he just brought the ball in. And Kadarius Toney, if we look back at the beginning of the year, was supposed to be the wide receiver 1. Drop issues from week number 1 against that very Lions team that almost went all the way and met this team in the Super Bowl. Yeah, I'm not very high on this team. I think if you're going to draft anybody, defense looks all right too. It's got to be wide receiver.
Yeah, completely agree. That's why the grade is not an F. Because of Rice, he's the only viable option at receiver. And it just looks like Mahomes has no trust in his receivers, and it shows to the production of the other options. MVS and Tony were projects that didn't work, and it's time to move on from them.
Yeah, there's no depth here at all, and we go to tight ends where I've got a decently, I would say, accurate prediction if they can pull it off. If the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, I think Kelsey just hangs it up. He's 34 years old. He's got a girlfriend now. I don't know if you've heard, and his brother just hung it up about 3 weeks ago and is now going to every Chiefs game known to man shirtless as one of the fans, shotgunning beers in the parking lot with fans. Yeah, Jason Kelsey's a mood for sure. But from what we saw this year, Travis Kelsey did his job, missed a couple of games. He's still one of the best to ever do it at the position, but he is slowing down. I do think he hangs it up. Otherwise, it'd probably be at a solid A because Dylan, the tight end market's pretty brutal right now. There's a couple names out there like TJ Hawkinson, like Sam Laporta, both in the NFC North video we did not too long ago, who we can be optimistic about. But George Kittle's over 30 now. Travis Kelsey's well over 30. Mark Andrews is getting hurt. We're starting to see our generation of tight ends the last few years die down. You've got them at a B+ at the tight end position.
Yeah, it's no shock that Kelsey has great synergy with Mahomes. But here's where I'm more pessimistic. He's getting up there in age. The future longevity is a question mark. We don't know if this is his final year. We are unsure of a lot. There's just a lot of question marks barring his future.
And that is, folks, for those of you who are just tuning in, I see Tino's in the chat. We do have kind of a dynasty angle here. We want to see what's going to be happening in the future years. We've gotten to know Noah Gray once in a while because Kelsey did miss a couple of games. But overall, he hangs it up. I mean, this grade's going to tank a ton. So Dylan relying a little bit more on the fact that Travis Kelsey, again, is 34 years old. That's old for anybody in the NFL, unless you're a quarterback who's just hanging on. Or I know kickers will make it pretty long as well. We now go to the defense. I'd say one of the stronger aspects of this team. Looks like you agree as well, Dylan. You've got B. I've got A-. Reed, McDuffie. We've got Jerry Sneed. All productive defensive backs. Sneed really came up clutch. He had a little peanut Tillman punch on Zay Flowers in that AFC Championship game. And overall, from a fantasy perspective, if we're just looking at this defense as a conglomerate as a whole, they were 6th in fantasy points per game. They weren't allowing a whole lot. We were seeing those fumbles converted. We were seeing a few picks here and there. This is a team that has been really stingy on the defensive side of the ball. And Dylan, I would argue they're a big reason that the Chiefs are where they're at. They just held Lamar Jackson and that Ravens offense that was firing on all cylinders the first 18, 19 weeks of their season to 10 points.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm just a little bit on the down end of the defense because in other games, they really haven't proven themselves as what we are known as the Chiefs defense. But like getting Chris Jones back was huge for their front. He's been unbelievable at the front and the secondary, very young. There's a lot of talent on that secondary, but I would just say they lack some linebackers. That would probably be where my head is at on the defensive end.
Yeah, so if you wanted to do like an all-out bull rush, if you're looking schematics-wise for the defense for the Chiefs, maybe that's not the best situation to be in the world, but when you do look at the whole context of this team, trending upwards, Mahomes is only getting better, and I know the numbers weren't great this year, but again, we look at the supporting cast, the weaknesses. We have the possibility of his right-hand man in Travis Kelsey retiring. We have by far the worst wide receiving core he's ever worked with, and we have a running back who's on the up and up, but this defense really a great reason they are where they're at. Lots to look forward to for Kansas City, especially if you're a buy low person in the wide receiving core. I think the only one I would mess with is Rashee Rice. Otherwise, we are definitely looking for rookies. All right, we've got Tino in the chat. Tino, thanks for joining us. Says, what's up, guys? Travis really screwed me this year. It's interesting because if you look at Travis Kelsey's stats, and you just stack him up against the general tight end market, he did great. But if you compare him to his past years, I don't know, Dylan, didn't it kind of feel like he fell off? Even without the injuries, this passing offense looked like it lost a step or two this year.
Yeah, it did. And I think that's partially due to the fact that there's just no other option. Halfway through the year, it was all Kelsey. And then that's when Rice kind of stepped in, was that second half of the year. where in years prior you had another option to pair with Kelsey, so his production can go up. So it just kind of felt a little off this year.
I think teams feel, I agree with you 100%, a little more confident with double teaming somebody like Travis Kelsey when, like you said again, the next best option is Rashee Rice. And no offense to him, he absolutely exploded for well over 100 yards against the Ravens. I expect him to need to play a pivotal role for the Chiefs to pull anything off here in the Super Bowl. But it helps a lot more when we flash back 2 to 3 years and you have somebody like Tyreek Hill just streaking up the side for 50 yards. That's going to carry a safety deep. And then you've got Travis Kelsey for a little check down. He's a tight end. He's going to get your yak or yards after catch, and he does a lot better there. So, Tino, I sympathize with you. If you're in Dynasty, I'm really not a Travis Kelsey buyer unless you get a really good bargain for him. But you need to understand, especially if the Chiefs win this game, you are betting against his retirement, which I think, depending on the outcome of the Super Bowl, becomes more and more likely. So now we are going to move on to, it doesn't feel like they were second in this division, but beyond the Chiefs, it really was a dumpster fire. We're going to move on to the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders have a lot of issues, specifically at the coaching spot. They've had an ever-revolving door. The McDaniels experiment did not work. Pierce gets the full-time job. They stuck around 500 for a while, and they were kind of like the Bears. They really weren't mathematically eliminated until the last couple of weeks. We've got a lot of issues in Vegas, like a ton of them. And one of them is the quarterback position. They signed Jimmy Garoppolo in the offseason. Injury prone. Once again, that's a risk you knew you were going to take when you go after somebody like that. I think it's possibly time to draft another quarterback, at least to spur up some competition. I know they just got O'Connell out of Purdue, and he did have some bright spots, had a really ugly game against the Chiefs, I think 2 weeks to go in the regular season. It's a shame because as we go through this team, they honestly have a pretty good supporting cast. You've got some big names on here who I'm not going to tease until we get to each respective position, but the quarterback's a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I completely agree. Jimmy Garoppolo isn't the guy. Constant question marks all season with his injuries and just ability on the field. And I think Aiden O'Connell was playing well towards the end of the stretch. I think he's the guy. He kind of thrived in that Pierce offense.
Am I a nut for thinking they should have just kept Derek Carr? He's not phenomenal. He's not even great. But he's not a C-, I would argue. I'd say he's about a C+ or a B-. The fact that we're going to go top to bottom with this Raiders team, and there's a firm argument to make that the quarterback is the worst position on this entire team, dynasty, fantasy, or not, and that's the one they really abandoned. I know there's probably a long play here. They're looking to develop O'Connell, or they're looking to get somebody else in there who can really, filter in with the rest of the guys. But also, I'll say his name a little early. There is a huge reason that Devontae Adams packed his bags and went to Vegas, and it was his buddy from Fresno State in Derek Carr, and now he's gone. So we'll talk about wide receivers in a bit. Great supporting cast, and we start with the running backs. Josh Jacobs had a down year. Very inefficient. That offensive line is one of the worst in the entire league, but Jacobs, 3.5 yards per carry, straight up. Typically among the bottom of the ranks in yards per carry before contact. So that's your indication that you're behind a not very supportive line. I'll put him at a B because he did have that pass catching upside throughout the entire year, but kind of a disappointment in my opinion. He had a monster 2022, kind of took a step back this year.
Yeah, I have it a little bit higher. I have a B+ because it's hard to scale coming off of such a good year to a year where it's a little bit down because he didn't have a great year, but he had an okay year. He was in the top for consistent backs for sure. He didn't pass that 1,000-yard marker and only put up 6 rushing touchdowns. I don't really think Jacobs was the issue. I think the issue was coaching and coachability of the team. Sure, your O-line isn't the best, but you should still be able to run if you have a good running back. Look at Barry Sanders and the O-lines he had.
That's a good point. It's all about the schemes that are being drawn up. I still think it's hilarious that I feel like it was pretty quickly forgotten. This team put up 70 points to get Brandon Staley fired. I mean, just one of the most random performances I have ever seen for a team that did not play good football this year. They didn't play horrible. They really weren't in that good of a division, so it was kind of wide open if they could go out and steal a couple games from the Chiefs and if they could go out and win a few key matchups that ended up being close losses. But we'll go on to, I would argue, the strong suit for this team in the wide receiver. Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers were quietly one of the best 1-2 punches in the league, and maybe it didn't always show up on the stat sheet because of the subpar coaching, because of the subpar quarterback play, because of a lackluster offense, with the exception of the time they did put up 70 points. But Myers went from being that guy on the Patriots who went a couple of years without even registering a touchdown to having 800 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, and he's still pretty young. I know it feels like he isn't because he bounced from one franchise to another. It's just going to come down to quarterback play. But Devontae and Jacoby Myers, I would even put him at an A, but if you fast forward 2 years, I can't promise you they'll both be on this roster.
Yeah, that's a great point. Looking further ahead, especially with the dynasty outlook, Devontae Adams, huge production regression from last year, having less yards and less touchdowns in his sophomore season with the Raiders. And again, you can put the blame on the QB, but it's not always on the quarterback. I do understand that the quarterback is the one getting the ball to these guys, but it's not just the quarterback. It's the plays that are being drawn. It's the schemes that are being thrown at the offense. Jacoby Myers is a free agent that teams will be on the lookout for with a really solid year at the wide receiver 2 spot in Vegas. And it's just a sharp drop-off from Adams to Tucker and Renfro. I was a big believer 2 years ago on Renfro, and now I'm not. I thought he was going to be that slot guy, and he just hasn't transitioned at all to the slot guy that we would have wanted to see it, like a Wes Welker role from him, and he just hasn't progressed into that.
And maybe some of that goes to coaching. I mean, a couple years ago, wide receiver 1 and 1,000 yards from Hunter Renfro, and now either he can't stay on the field or he can't really produce when he is on the field. We'll now move on to the tight end position. Yeah, I mean, kind of high expectations. You take rookie tight end and you're taking a bit of a gander. Worked out well for the Packers. They got 2 decent ones. But yeah, Mayer was underwhelming. Austin Hooper is actually on that team, who was pretty productive a couple of years ago. He's decent support. So if we're talking just strictly depth grades, I would give him like a B+ or an A-, but it's a C because there's no definitive threat at the number 1 spot. It's kind of a project situation. It's hard to judge when Adams also attracts so many targets, even though Devontae Adams didn't have a career year by any means, still did well and still racked in a lot of targets. And we kind of see that with different quarterbacks. If you've got somebody like an Aiden O'Connell back there, one of 2 things typically happens. You lean on the run. This team lost a lot of football games. Or you just lean on your number 1 wide receiver and probably a future Hall of Famer. So the latter happened. And yeah, we didn't see a great dimension out of this tight end group. But you've got B-.
Yeah, I've got a B- on looking ahead. I'm more optimistic on this one. Meyer had a slow start to begin his rookie year, but he started to get more targets, chances, opportunity on the field. Bank on him to improve and get more targets with a new coaching regime. And if they situate that quarterback thing that's going on, it's a dumpster fire right now for quarterback, like you mentioned. But if they figure that out, get a good scheme, incorporate the tight end, and he's only a rookie, so he's going to be there for 3 more years at least. I think that Meyer will develop very nicely.
It's crazy because I'm thinking back to, we did the AFC North not too long ago. That was our first division. There are a lot of teams out there where when the quarterback is the worst grade, the ceiling just feels so mitigated. I am a firm believer that we were talking about the Steelers. You put Kirk Cousins on that team, they possibly go to the AFC Championship. I mean, it's tough to project considering how the field was this year, but the door was wide open with the Bengals being hurt, the Bills not being in a position to host all of their games and everything in between. But, well, they hosted 1 game and they still lost to the Chiefs. Anyway, we go to the defense, and I would say one of their stronger suits, but again, this is still not an extremely talented football team, and we still do have a dumpster fire under center, as we've said before. I've got B. Dylan's got C+. Max Crosby's an absolute beast. Huge admirer of him and his story. No one beyond him, though, had over 5 sacks. And that is where you kind of have the Aaron Donald situation that the Rams have been dealing with the last few years, where you're trying to get a real significant second threat. Because if you don't, and no one else has beyond 5 sacks, Crosby's going to get doubled a lot. And we've seen that. He's been held. Yeah, I think that's mainly it. There's not a whole lot of dimensions beyond Max Crosby. If not for him, I'm probably even below where you are. If they don't have a Max Crosby, I'm probably sitting at like a D+.
Yeah, I'm at a C+ just because pretty much because of Crosby, but also because of the outlook of the second half of the season. Because the second half of the season, the defense actually looked decent. The secondary was playing really well. They were getting some interceptions, and other guys from the front seven were starting to get to the quarterback later on in the season.
That is a good point. They did come alive. I keep thinking back to that 70-point game. One thing I did forget to mention, 9th in fantasy in points per game. So a team that was able to jar some turnovers loose and have some success. The Raiders, if we look at their future, yes, it's relying on the quarterback. I feel like they're just kind of coasting. I really thought they had a chance to jump and even take the division last year because they went out and after making the playoffs 2 years ago, got one of the best receivers, maybe even the best receiver in the game at the time, in Davante Adams. And they're just coasting. They're around 7, 8, 9 wins. Wide receiver could drop off with Jacoby Myers being the free agent that he's going to be in this offseason, like Dylan said. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on, but the surrounding cast, specifically on this Raiders team, is really going to depend on what they do at quarterback. And that's usually the case when a team has a hole under center. Andy's in here, says, want San Francisco, but I would bet Kansas City. Yeah, a lot of people really do like the Purdy story. A lot of people don't like the Chiefs story and everything in between. I think it's going to be interesting. This is a rematch of 4 years ago. I did throw in the chat, who will win the Super Bowl? And Andy's saying, want San Francisco, would bet Kansas City. We'll take a tiny intermission here so I can ask you this, Dylan. Score and team prediction for the Super Bowl going on about a day from now. I would love to hear it because it'll be on video if you nail the pick.
So, first off, I'd like to clear the air. This is probably one of the most polarizing Super Bowls that we've had.
Yeah.
You have diehard Purdy fans. You have people that want to just crap on Purdy. You have diehard Swiftie fans. You have people that don't like Taylor Swift. You have people that don't like Mahomes. There's just a lot of interesting stories heading into this Super Bowl. Very polarizing. So my score and prediction is going to be Kansas City at 24, 49ers at 35.
Oh, high scoring battle. So many weapons. You and I were talking before we, went live today, and you mentioned there's a lot of weapons on this team. There are a lot of different options, specifically on the offense. But if you look overall, I'm not sure if you heard, Cam Newton kind of opened his mouth a week and a half ago and said, Purdy is the 10th best player on his team. And some can take that as a rip, but to be the 10th best player on this 49ers team in 2024, it's not a bad thing. And this is also somebody who was literally picked last in the draft. But I started thinking, right? Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle. If you're looking at guys who, among their respective positions, right? Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Fred Warner, Kyle Juszczyk is the best fullback in the game right now, I would argue. Trent Williams delivers pancakes on the daily. We've got Jimmy Ward on the defense. Open field tackling, phenomenal. Fred Warner. That is 9, and I think there are arguments to be made for all of those if you talk about where does Purdy stack up against the rest of the quarterback class and where do those guys stack up against the rest of their positions. I'm not going to say I fully agree with Cam Newton, but I can kind of see where he was coming from because this is a talent-filled team. Andy is saying, and then I'll give my prediction. So you've got 35-24 Niners. Andy's saying Purdy is pretty good. I agree. And he's saying yes to CMC and Purdy. No to Swift, Mahomes, and Kelsey. Way to go, Dylan. So we can see what side of the camp that Andy's on. I agree, right? As soon as somebody's team was out of the playoffs or out of contention, I feel like we had no issue watching everybody pick their camp. As soon as this matchup was set, it was either I love the underdog story of Purdy and this stacked team, and I really want to see the Fighting Swifties in Kansas City go down, or the other end of it is I was just introduced to football and I love Taylor Swift, or I'm a big Travis Kelsey fan, or I'm a big Mahomes fan, big Mahomes believer. I always go for him once my team is out. There's that aspect of it. And I also love legacy, and this guy could get his 3rd Super Bowl in 6 years. So, yeah, 2 interesting storylines for sure. I doubted Mahomes twice in the playoffs. I was fully convinced that Josh Allen was finally going to get his revenge. I felt like, and I still do feel like, that Bills team, top to bottom, is more talented. I felt like the Ravens defense would actually be able to stifle him. Andy is saying 28-24 Chiefs. So going the objective route, because Andy has made it very clear he doesn't want the Chiefs to win. I have doubted Mahomes twice, and I have noticed a consistent trend in the playoffs in my, 22 years of life. Those who are experienced and have a track record for succeeding in the playoffs are going to continue to do so more times than not in the playoffs. Now, there is the moment where somebody has to break in, right? Like Joe Burrow is going to show up next year with a fully healthy team, and he could go on a run. Because out of nowhere, he had to do what most can't, show up and beat other teams in the playoffs when he hasn't been there before. But you have a guy in Brock Purdy who is going to be playing in the biggest game of his life, and you have a lot of other players who have been starving for a ring. Everybody talks about how the Cowboys have been living in their Super Bowl era from almost 30 years ago now, or over 30 years ago now. It's been just as long for the 49ers since they actually got a ring. They've come here and come up short so many times, and I want this to be the time they do it, but I don't think it is. And even if you look back at my playoffs video, I had the 49ers winning it all. I did not have them taking on Patrick Mahomes, who is playing like a man possessed right now. If you look at his playoff splits, even with the weapons he has right now, you would guess he has Tyreek Hill. Mistake-free football. With all that said, I'm going to go Chiefs 31, Niners 27. It's going to be close. Would not doubt if the Niners go out there and blow them out by 40, because that is just how talented that team is. But I don't think that's how it works with Mahomes has more playoff wins than some franchises right now, which is insane to me. And he's only like a few years into his career. But thought we'd kind of address that. We are halfway through. We will next go to the Broncos. This one's interesting. New quarterback a couple years ago. New coach in Sean Payton this year. Dumpster fire across the board. We'll start with Russ himself. From a statistical standpoint, didn't look horrible. This is about the greatest separation that you'll see. No, me and Dylan are not super far apart. I mean, B to C minus is a pretty decent jump, but it's about a grade and a half off. But a B to a C minus, that's, one's above average and one isn't. So Wilson's under contract via a 5-year extension that takes action this year. They did extend him after they signed him. I'm basing this off of the future and the assumption that this guy stays. The Broncos wanted Russ to move back his injury guarantee and his contract. He refused to do so, was a big advocate for player protection, always has been, stuck to his guns. And so while this team was still technically in contention to make the playoffs, they were fighting for that 7th and final spot, the Broncos benched him. They said, no, we don't want to pay you the entirety of what you're owed, so we're just going to take you out of the game. And then that allows them to save money because he didn't play a whole lot of games. So they benched him instead. I don't think Sean Payton loves Russell Wilson. We've seen some clips, and you've got C minus, so you don't love Russell Wilson in the quarterback position here.
Yeah, and it's not even that I don't love Russ Wilson. I just don't think Sean Payton believes him in him at all. Like, Wilson clearly was not illustrated as the Sean Payton style quarterback. Wilson will not be the starting quarterback in Denver next season. And by that odds, who's on deck? And what's interesting, again, too, is if they do end up releasing him or doing whatever they have to do, whatever team pays him. So let's say the Buccaneers. I'm just throwing out a team. Let's say they want to pay him $5 million a year. The Broncos have to match what he's supposed to be owed, no matter what. So any team that pays him has to match, or the Broncos match the remainder of his contract.
Did not know that. And Russ does not strike me as a revenge-filled being. But if there is any spite in his heart, I think there's decent odds he just goes out there and holds a bidding war. I'll go to whoever pays me the most, because I know for a fact the team I am technically with right now that has essentially screwed me over because they wouldn't accept the fact that I wasn't willing to bend on my contract, just benched me, they're going to owe more. Do you think there's a chance he kind of just holds a little bidding war and goes, you know what? Whoever wants to give me the most, I know that's going to come out of the Broncos' pocket?
Well, the interesting thing about the bidding war is that it won't affect. So, like, let's say the Buccaneers want to pay him $5 million, and let's say the Steelers want to pay him $10 million. So if the Bucs pay him $5 million, then the Broncos owe $30 million. But if the Steelers pay the 10 million and he goes to the Steelers, then the Broncos are only paying 25 million.
I see.
So it caps out at 35 million. So if Russ really wanted to be like, if he really wanted to handcuff that organization and go for revenge, he would sign a league minimum and get the league minimum and then make the Broncos pay 35, 34 million.
They're owed the remainder of it. Okay, I see what you're saying. I thought you meant if he goes to sign somewhere for 17 mil, they have to match. Like, okay, all right, I got it now. So that's interesting.
Oh, yeah, I meant match up to. I meant
gotcha.
match up to his contract.
Right, up to what he's owed. So there is that opt-out option there. I feel like whenever Jared Stidham goes somewhere, someone leaves. He was in Las Vegas last year, and Derek Carr flew the nest, and literally the exact same thing happened. Derek Carr got benched. And now that's happening with Russ because of some contract implications. We'll see what happens. We go to the running back position. Not great, not bad-ish, I guess. Javonte Williams was not productive at all. 3.5 yards per carry. Still didn't look 100% from his previous injuries at times. Really good pass catching back his first year in the league, and he's kind of been up and down since. The reason this team is not lower for me is Jaleel McLaughlin. 5.4 yards per carry on 76 rushes, so that's 410 yards. I expect him to be the future of this backfield. Running backs do not have a very long shelf life, and in general, when you have someone who is that productive over 76 rushes, that's a decent sample size in McLaughlin. I think he takes over, so I'm a tad bit more optimistic than you, but I still understand why you have a C here.
Yeah, I've got a C here based on the fact that Williams is the lead guy right now. But if you look at the splits of every running back, it's truly a running back by committee, and there's no clear-cut number one option. Even though it may seem that Williams on paper is the number one guy, I think we're seeing a running back by committee here in Denver.
And from a dynasty standpoint, you don't love those. You would much rather have kind of what the Chiefs are doing, where it looks like we're trending in a positive direction for you Isaiah Pacheco buyers right now. Or what we saw from Derrick Henry forever, Jonathan Taylor forever. This feels like we could have a running back competition for that number one spot in the offseason. If McLaughlin takes it, I might even go higher, depending on how his efficiency goes in the future. We will have to see. We go to wide receiver. This one's just weird. Great depth. Like, there are a decent amount of names on here who I do believe can contribute, but Jeudy underperformed. Cortland Sutton had 10 touchdowns, which is phenomenal. And then Mims had a few breakout plays. He was kind of like your MVS, but he could catch the ball a little better. My issue, like I just said, no Crown Royale, number one wide receiver on this team that really scares anybody or intrigues anybody in the fantasy world. Just 3 names that we know for different reasons who are capable of making big plays and putting up big numbers for 1 or 2 games, but they can't do it week in, week out. And you've got a C for them.
Yeah, I have a C for him. Like you mentioned, there's just, you know the names, but do you really know the names? And Jerry Jeudy just hasn't broke out into that receiver that we thought he would be or turn into when he was drafted. I'm not going to take anything away from Sutton. He had a great year, but he's getting up there in age. He can't be that reliable receiver week in and week out anymore. You got to let the young guys show up, and maybe that's where Mims was starting to step up, but we just didn't see that consistently from him. And they're just also mid. I wouldn't hit high on any.
Yeah, it's interesting when you see the quarterback positions up in the balances. They have Stidham. Maybe the Broncos, even though they had a decent record, go after a quarterback. I don't think they're going to get high enough to get like a May or Williams or anything. Maybe they go after a McCarthy and see what happens there. But, yeah, it's almost as if this offense has not been good since Peyton Manning. It's the first time that we had a 20-plus touchdown passer in the league since Peyton Manning, which was almost a decade ago. Russ did accomplish that, but he's still not safe. And like you said, Sean Payton still doesn't believe in him. Does that trickle down to the wide receivers? I'm not sure, because we don't have a great quarterback situation going on in Las Vegas, and Devontae was still easily top 10 as long as he was healthy all year. We don't have that definitive name here. The 10 touchdowns were exciting. Sutton went on a bit of a streak midseason, but there's not a whole lot to be excited about here at all. I don't even see a whole lot of buy low candidates. This offense is lackluster. The backfield is We'll go to the tight ends. it's worse. Yeah, it does not get better, folks. Like, from a fantasy perspective, even though this team was in playoff contention until the tail end, this is horrible. Troutman's supposed to be the lead guy. Greg Dulcich got hurt right at the beginning of the season. Noah Fant was an option, but now he's in Seattle via that Russell Wilson trade. Yeah, this is possibly the worst tight end room in the league. I don't know if it looks like you agree.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah. 5 tight ends played and only one was over 200 yards. That's all I got to say. Like, that's disastrous.
Like, I don't care if you're in, there's some pretty exotic league formats out there, especially for Dynasty. You could be in one of those crazy 24-team, super flex leagues, double tight end. I'm still not messing with these people. Like, to have 5 guys out there, first off, if 5 tight ends are getting any type of playing time beyond garbage time, I'd be a little concerned unless you love to run the ball, which, look at our grid. They don't really love to do anything on offense here. They're kind of figuring it all out at once. But then you have only one of those being over 200 yards. That's not promising at all. So surely it gets better because Denver's always been known for defense. Right? No, not at all. Like, this team, if you just looked at our grades, you would guess they were somewhere in the ballpark of 3-14. Maybe 4-13. They were fine, honestly. Wins and loss-wise, they were okay. But the offense hasn't looked great. The defense hasn't looked great. The reality is they just won a ton of ugly ball games. We're seeing some turnover. We might have a new running back one. We'll probably have a new quarterback, depending on what goes on the next few months. And the defense allowed 24.3 points per game, 6th most. Frankly, it's a miracle they won as many games as they did because nobody here got above, what's their best grade? A B? So you've got D- for the defense. Again, probably one of the worst units in the league. They allowed a lot of points this year.
Yeah, giving up that amount of points and not being able to progress is probably the big thing for me. They can't draft anyone in the first or second round for the next 3 years because of trading for Russ Wilson and for Sean Payton. They are quite literally handcuffed to not upgrade that defense unless they want to spend money. But even there, the money is handcuffed by one guy, Russ Wilson, because he's getting guaranteed money, and whatever team he decides to go to, the Broncos are going to have to pay whatever the other team doesn't pay.
And it's interesting, right? Because when we talk about bad quarterback situations, you can make an argument that the wide receivers and the tight ends are always directly affected, even in these gradings that we do for Dynasty. Running backs, you can make the argument that the pass game isn't a threat, so teams can sell it on the run, right? There is almost no case scenario other than in Denver where you can claim that the defense is impacted by the quarterback, except for the financial conflicts that you just mentioned. Draft pick wise, they were all in on Russ. Monetary value, they are all in on Russ because they're tied to him. They can't even improve this team a whole lot outside of like a free agent pickup. And you better hope those guys are cheap, and then you need a hero story from there. And to make anything of this team that I think is only going to go down in the next few years, you're going to need a lot of hero stories. If you're playing Dynasty, you're going to have to do some real convincing when talking to either of us that you're making a good investment if you pick somebody on the Broncos. Jaleel McLaughlin, I'll give you for like Dynasty and futures, but you need a better offense, and you need to be up in ball games consistently. Wide receivers, Cortland Sutton, maybe, but there's nothing to be excited about in Denver right now. I think it's only down from here. Andy's saying, similar score. Corey, great minds think alike, so he has 28-24 Chiefs. Ironically enough, you and I just talked about the Broncos. We talked about the Raiders. They had better records than the Chargers, but I would argue the Chargers have brighter futures than the Raiders, the Broncos. I won't go as far as the Chiefs, but new coach in town, phenomenal quarterback, which we will start with in Justin Herbert. And you and I are both firm believers of him, especially with the situation he's kind of been thrown into. For the first time in his career in Los Angeles, I feel like he's been given some help. I believe it was Anthony Lynn he started with. Then they went to Brandon Staley, did get in the playoffs. Still no playoff wins for Herbert. And, well, let's just look at his weapons. He's got Keenan Allen. He's got Mike Williams. He's got Josh Palmer. All of those guys have missed significant time at some point in the last couple of years. But Herbert's talent has never been in question. He's got the support from Harbaugh that we're looking for. The injuries all over the team were a bummer for sure, and it actually converted over to Herbert. He couldn't finish the season. but this guy throws for plenty of volume. There aren't many out there, especially now. I feel like we're in kind of the day and age of quarterback mediocrity. And Dylan and I were having a conversation earlier today before we went live about talent versus best quarterback. If we talk about pure talent, where do you have Herbert? You got this as an A? I'd go top 5.
Pure talent-wise, it's up there with Josh Allen.
Right? Yeah.
And my grade should also translate to that because Herbert is the future of the quarterback game. Every year he improves. He is definitely safe for his job in the future. He's much more secure now with a quality head coach in Harbaugh. He did go down around halfway through the season, but that shouldn't hinder anything much. I had him in fantasy this year. I was a big believer this year, and he was great. Top 5 quarterback in fantasy points all year. I think he was actually number 1 for about 4 or 5 weeks, and then that injury came, and it just kind of derailed this Chargers team from another playoff opportunity.
I think there needs to be an investigation with the Chargers, like medical staff, because I feel like every year, the last few years, that's a joke, but still, like the wide receivers go down. Everybody went down this year. Eckler went down, and then when he came back, he looked like he blew a tire every time he broke out into the open field. Williams goes down as per usual. Keenan Allen with the age goes down. Joshua Palmer goes down. And you know who else went down and is going downhill in terms of age? We just said his name. Austin Eckler took a significant step back. So if you talk about what profile did Jim Harbaugh come from with that national championship winning Michigan football team? They came from the same profile that almost any other team not named Ohio State in the Big Ten, that's going to change with the expansion this year, run from. It's the run. They are run-based. They did phenomenal with Blake Corum. They had Donovan Edwards break out. It was a run-first team, and unfortunately, maybe he'll have a different plan. You know, Harbaugh was coaching in the NFL not too long ago. Unfortunately, the run game for here is on a downtick. Because, Dylan, if we did this video a year ago, they're probably an A+. Austin Eckler did everything you wanted him to. Efficient on the ground, efficient through the air, and healthy. Well, now he's 29, excuse me. He's less efficient, and he's not healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I've got that B grade. I'm a little higher. I mean, he had a down year, yeah, but he still had over 1,000 yards combined in rushing and receiving. And Kelly had glimpses of looking real promising for a future back, but he lacks pass game. And maybe that's where Harbaugh drives that play action from, is Kelly instead of Eckler.
That's a good point. Just use him as that decoy as opposed to actually getting him involved in the pass game. On the receiving end, he can still be involved in the pass game. He just gets guys to commit more up the middle. Yeah, Kelly lacking the pass catching aspect from a fantasy perspective is obviously not too appealing. Considering the personnel they bring in Harbaugh at the helm of this team, I would not be shocked if they go running back 3rd round, 4th round. I'm not a big fan of taking running backs in the 1st round a whole lot unless you get like a Bijan Robinson who was misused by Arthur Smith pretty much all year, but still had a pretty good year. But this is a team that has a 29-year-old back. Eckler still did have a good year, to your point. I think the draft is going to play somewhat of a factor, and whoever they take should see a decent amount of playing time. We go to the wide receivers. One of the biggest what-ifs in this entire league. They could easily be an A- to an A, but injuries bring us down a little bit. I've got a B+. Dylan's got a B. Allen, Williams, I've already said it multiple times, injury prone. Quentin Johnston gave me hope, and then we saw drop issues with him. I don't want to say my hope is gone because there was this 2nd rounder who went to the Packers who had significant drop issues his rookie year, and then the story of Devontae Adams was born. So rookie year, things happen, but Quentin Johnston was definitely a letdown. The injuries were the real letdown, though, and you've got a B here, so we're about in the same spot.
Yeah, I completely agree. Allen is getting old is my number one concern. And even Williams, he's kind of getting up there in age as well. But you look at the younger guys, and Palmer and Johnston, they had highlights of promising receivers for this future team. And I think that Palmer is really stepping into a bigger role next year.
And that's the thing, right? Outside of the injuries and the fact that Williams and especially Keenan Allen are definitely getting up there in age. Keenan's well over 30 now. The development's been great. Like Joshua Palmer comes in and looks well. Gerald Everett Looks great. So we'll go to the tight ends next. But when you look at the talent, just pure talent of the pass catchers on this team, even to the backfield, the passing offense on here is great. It's beautifully sculpted around Herbert. Injuries are really the main concern here. Everett, he's been consistent, middle of the road, had another good, solid, reliable year. 51 receptions for 411 yards and 3 touchdowns to his name. Is that going to blow you away? No, but we talked about the watering down of this tight end market, where guys like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Mark Andrews are going to retire soon, and they're getting older, and they're getting more injury prone. When those guys leave, Everett, in my mind, instead of being a top 12, top 14 tight end, he could be a top 8, top 10, definitely top 12 tight end. So you and I perfectly agree here. You've got to be as well.
Yeah, there's not much more that I can really highlight. I mean, Everett and Parham Jr.
Oh,
looked
yeah.
really well. Everett is the more reliable option, though, and just a solid 1-2 for the tight end spot for the Chargers going forward.
Parham's a big dude, too. I think he has a basketball background. If he doesn't, I'd be shocked because he is well above. I think he's like 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". So, I mean, if you look at the Chargers and you just based 2024 to 25 like records off of Dylan and I's grades, you would say they have the potential, keyword potential, to win 9, 10, or 11 games, especially with Harbaugh at the helm. Defense is where we will wrap up this team at, and that's really the weakness. 23.4 points allowed. Dylan, I don't know if I've ever seen a team financially invest so much in one side of the ball and have it fall on its face. Names like Derwin James, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa. We know this defense. We know the names on this defense, but the results aren't really matching, and I'm assuming that's part of the reason you got them at C- as well.
Yeah, my C- stems from the fact that they spend so much money on the defense and they're not using draft capital. Granted, they were using draft capital to upgrade their offense, but the defense needs draft capital as well. So I wouldn't be shocked if a first round pick goes to the defensive side, or even if the second round pick goes defense and the first round pick goes running back. It could possibly go either way, second round on the running back, first round on the defense, but I think the defense needs some investing.
And I'm a big advocate, I think you kind of are too, where unless you have a dominant defense, like if you had the Ravens this year, or in the past, if you've had like the Steelers, really on any AFC North team, if you had the Packers down the stretch, those last few games, there are certain defenses, when they're in their element, you can stick with them in fantasy. I stream them. Unless I really get one of those lockdown teams this year, it would have been the Ravens or the Cowboys in terms of scoring touchdowns on the defensive end. Darius Bland had a few of those. I'll stream them. So maybe the Chargers come up if they're playing interdivision outside of Mahomes, if they're playing against the Raiders, if they're playing against the Broncos. Based on what we know about these teams right now here in February of 2024, probably feeling pretty confident, but I agree with you. I'm not going to lean on them. I am going to lean on this passing game. What does that mean? Herbert, any of their wide receivers. If you're looking for good old reliable and you don't want to jump, if you are drafting for the first time in Dynasty, you don't want to jump for somebody and you want to sit back and take someone who has a high floor, that's going to be Gerald Everett. But defense, not really something we would invest in. So we've done this in the past, Dylan. We've got about 10 minutes left here. One position out of this whole division that you are feeling very optimistic about, that you think maybe isn't the highest, but is going to skyrocket in 2024?
I would probably go with my tight end spot for the Raiders with Michael Mayer.
I like that.
He's a project, but I think he's got enough raw talent where he can really elevate himself and progress really well, especially coming from the Midwest, and we know how the Midwest produces tight ends. He's not an Iowa product, but he's a Notre Dame product, and typically Notre Dame offensive players kind of pan out well. We saw Claypool come off for a couple of seasons, and then he fizzled out. But Mike Meyer is someone who is quite literally the opposite of Claypool. He's a vertical threat. He can block. He is your five-tool tight end, if you will say, for baseball. Five-tool athlete at the tight end spot for football. He can do pretty much everything you want out of a tight end. It's just very raw.
He is a phenomenal prospect. We kind of heard rumblings of this is a Kyle Pitts comparison in terms of his ability to box out, his pure athleticism, obviously his frame, huge guy. I'm going to shift over to the Chiefs. I think it would be malpractice if this front office did not invest in some type of an improvement at the wide receiver position. I love Rashee Rice. He, this year, should not have been the wide receiver one, and if he was, he should have had a great supporting cast. Again, do we know these names? Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdes-Scantling. We actually do. Justin Watson had a couple nice games. Do we know them for the best of reasons in 2024? No, we don't. They need to go out. I wouldn't hate Jacoby Myers going to this team. There's a free agency pickup. You can go sign a fresh new contract. Is it going to solve all your issues? No. Can you get much worse than a D plus or in your case a D minus? Also no. You've got the best quarterback in the league right now, someone who's on the cusp of possibly winning 3 Super Bowls for your team in 6 years. And I'd give him more credit for this one than I would have the last 2 combined, considering his supporting cast. It would be absolute malpractice if they don't do something about this wide receiver position. And I guess one position on one team that you see maybe falling off, not improving, going downhill.
Oh, let's go with the Broncos quarterback under the assumption that Russ Wilson is gone because of the reasons I said earlier when we were talking about the Broncos, just because he's handcuffed to a contract that the Broncos have to pay no matter what he gets in the free agent market if he becomes a free agent. So he's pretty much capital that the Broncos pretty much dead weight.
Yeah.
Basically that is dragging behind the Broncos. Like he is going to be handcuffed, and really if you get rid of Russ, I think that the grade goes down more because he's a good quarterback. Why wouldn't you want to have Russ Wilson, who was more run heavy in his earlier seasons, but now became a passer first quarterback, and he didn't even do that bad this year. He was a very middle of the road, top 10, top 15 quarterback all year.
That is a very good point. I mean, it's kind of like if you somehow hold on to Russ, the relationship is destroyed. He's probably gone. We've got the financial ties there as well, so he really has the potential to control the fate of this Broncos team, even if he's not suiting up for them anymore. But you still have, if you just put all these quarterbacks in a vacuum, I would argue top 10, definitely top 12. Like, he's still a solid player. He's one of those, like you said, running quarterbacks in the beginning of his career. He had that running aspect. He's had to adapt his game to make sure he can play in the league for a long time. I am going to flip over, and even though John Harbaugh comes from a run-first team, considering their situation, I think it gets a little worse before it gets better. I'm not going to just sit here and try and convince anybody as Austin Eckler knocks on the door of 30 that the injuries and the explosiveness is going to get better. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of the game. We saw it with what looked like the most unstoppable human on earth in Derrick Henry. He took a step back and he's done in Tennessee. I think if they don't go out and draft a stud at running back and give him significant reps, which I'm not sure this team is going to be ready to do yet because Eckler's had such a profound impact on the offense. I think Eckler gets hurt. Someone gets thrown into a role they're not ready for, and it gets uglier before it gets prettier. Also, specifically because let's say this team sticks to their guns and doesn't pick somebody till the 6th round. Like you said, Dylan, the backup Joshua Kelly, solid, but really no passing aspect. So if he's going to have any involvement and it's in the play action, maybe it's effective, but a running back going up and not taking the ball is not going to show up on the stat sheet. So for that reason, it's not going to be a great step back, but I could see the running back position going down to like a C-. You know, we're not going to drop more than a full grade, but it's also just because beyond the Chiefs, I mean, can we get a lot worse anywhere else? Like, it's pretty ugly across the board. Wide receiver could be one that steps back a decent amount if Myers flies and then Adams leaves before the deadline next year. That could be interesting, but Adams has only been there for 2 years, and the quarterback position can't really get much worse. So you'd have to hope that the supporting cast situation gets a little better. All right, Dylan. Well, any big plans? I know you're calling a game tonight.
Just the game starts at 5, so I'll be kind of getting ready. Gotta eat and then shower. Just the little stuff.
The adult things, right, to prep for a game. But yeah, I was actually able to see Dylan on Wednesday. So we had a little in-person meetup, armchair fantasy style. But Dylan and I know each other from way before this whole channel really took off and is doing what it's doing now. But folks, if you have watched and enjoyed, thank you so much. Per our theme, the NFC West is going to be next. Could be the Super Bowl champion 49ers if Dylan's prediction comes through. You said 35-24 Niners, right?
Yep.
And I've got 31-27 Chiefs. So one of us will be right, one of us will be wrong. You'll hear all about it next time we go live in about a week. Folks, have a wonderful day. Make sure you leave a like. Make sure you go in the Discord. Join us there if you have not. And we will see you in the next one.